Hello, this is Melissa. It is Real History. Today is the 5th of June, 2025, and I'm joined today by Nick from Hayes Reviews. And I am excited to be talking with him about Snow Crash, a Neal Stephenson novel, kind of his big breakout novel from the early 90s. I forgot to look up the year, but anyway, hello, Nick. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you, and it's good to be here finally. It's been a long time coming. This one we've had quite a break since our last conversation, but I think we're going to be coming back with a bang because this is a really interesting book.
It is. It is. I don't know how we dive into this, but just before we hit record, I said, it's not that I loved this novel so much, but it opens up so many doors for discussion. There's so much going on. It really is kind of a key piece of fiction in terms of where we are in so-called reality and the whole world of the metaverse and artificial intelligence and the tech bros who seem to be, controlling the world now. It's just rich with material to talk about. All the kind of preamble ramble stuff that you have popularized in your presentations, which are so enjoyable. So where do we start?
That's a great question. I think a good place to start would be to talk a little bit about the author and his reputation and where he's worked and who he's inspired, and that might give us a little bit of context that will help listeners and viewers understand why the book is so important and how amazing it is given that it was written, was it the early 90s? I think it was
I
the
think
early
it was
90s. Let me double
92 or
check.
93.
Yes,
Yeah.
92.
Okay.
So for a book written in 92, it's amazingly prescient, and it inspired people like Bill Gates, like the tech bros of Silicon Valley, and Neal Stephenson went on, and I think still to this day, to have a very successful career founding companies and acting as advisors for
Mhm.
various big tech organizations. So that's a good place to start. Did you get a chance to look into Neal Stephenson, the man, and his background?
I did just a little bit, and interesting, very interesting. I shared an article on some other talk that I did where he was writing about, I forgot to pull that one up, but he was writing about the process and how you can educate people through fiction, which I thought was very interesting because his latest book is about solar geoengineering,
Oh,
and
okay.
it's climate fiction. And I didn't even realize that there was a subgenre of science fiction called climate fiction. So that was very interesting to me. But I'll just grab his little wiki page here, which I have pulled up. And I'll start with outside of writing. I'll kind of work back here. But he worked at Blue Origin, which is Jeff Bezos' spaceflight company, for 7 years in the early 2000s, while its focus was on novel, alternate approaches to space, alternate propulsion systems, and business models. And he left Blue when that became a more standard aerospace company. Then he worked on a project called Clang, which was a sword fighting fantasy game. But in terms of futurism, he was hired in 2014 by an augmented reality company called Magic Leap. And he was their chief futurist for 6 years until 2020 when he left as part of a layoff that they were having. But he is started another what they call open source metaverse called Lamina One. So he's still actively involved in the futurist game. And what's interesting is, Alan Watt would say that we're given fiction, science fiction, by people who have been brought in to the futurist societies. But this is some details of his earlier life are I wouldn't say murky, but they're not as fleshed out as they could be. And you can see that he's very well connected family wise. And so we wonder if he was brought into the futurist societies, or if it really is, haha, like it's described, that his work was just so amazing and future forward looking that he ends up becoming a futurist consultant. But the magic leap in Florida, augmented reality is becoming bigger. We don't hear about it as much as virtual reality, but it's becoming a bigger and bigger thing because who doesn't want like Tinkerbell to pop up out of their smartwatch and point the way to wherever it is they need to go? That's the kind of thing that you get with augmented reality, where you've got kind of holographic images that can be made to appear that they are in your physical space.
And that's one of the
That's
many things that is foreshadowed in the novel, because one of the way people access the metaverse in the book is by wearing goggles onto which is projected an image, a high resolution image, 3D or 2D, of that metaverse space. And that's kind of this idea of the Google Glass, the wearable tech where you'll put your glasses on and there'll be an overlay. And you might be, I've seen videos, concept videos of this, walking down the street and you look at a restaurant and the Trust Pilot rating pops up above the restaurant, you know, three
uh-huh.
out of five stars, or got food poisoning here, stay away. And this real time sort of overlay of reality, augmented reality. So it's even that is foreshadowed in the book.
That's very interesting. I was looking at augmented reality about, so I think it's been about 4 years now, and they're already using it in certain applications like uh, tours of real estate. So you can
Mhm.
see the property, but then with your wearable, details about the property will appear for you. So, I doubt it'll be showing anything real like, structural damage or foundation issues or the leak in the roof, but, it's over here. It'll be pretty things, pretty little things that'll pop up and say, oh, look over here. Your backyard is going to be the envy of the neighborhood. So yeah, and I think in certain parts of the world, certain parts of society, it is not the future, but it's here, which is interesting.
It also reminds me of the Pokemon Go phenomenon. Did you hear or see about this? Where
Yes.
you come across this, right? And how that was kind of an overlay of reality because it
Hmm.
used the maps provided by Google Earth and or something similar to that, and put a game over the top of that, and then had people walking around, and you saw them in gangs walking around and meeting up in certain places, and they would all have backpacks, a phone in each hand, and wires coming out of the phone into those little battery packs that people carry to keep their phones charged while they're on the go and using
Hmm.
them heavily. And it was very strange. And I have family members who got into that game, and they were saying that they'd never done so much walking. They were never interested in going for a walk until they got that game, and you would walk around and see which of the monsters popped up in which places and try and catch them, and that motivated them to get out the house and do some walks around the area, the local town where we lived. So it's a powerful incentive to some people to have this overlay, this augmentation to reality, which is quite mind blowing to me. But
It is. I didn't mark a description. Unfortunately, I didn't mark. No, I have my colored tabs here, but I didn't write what was on each tab. But somewhere I marked that he's describing a piece of technology in the metaverse that's quite a bit like Google Earth. And
yes.
when I was looking into him, it's the people who created Google Earth credit this novel as being inspirational and instrumental into the way they approached creating it, which is very interesting. Again, there's a real interplay between, chicken and egg here with his involvement in things. But just briefly, it says that he's now 65. His novels have been described as speculative fiction, science fiction, historical fiction, cyberpunk, baroque. His works explore mathematics, cryptography, linguistics, philosophy, currency, and the history of science. And it, it says he was born here in Maryland to a father who was a professor of electrical engineering. Paternal grandfather was a physics professor. Mother worked in biochemistry lab. Her father was a biochemistry professor. He studied at Boston University, first specializing in physics and then switching to geography when he found that that would allow him to spend more time on the university mainframe. He graduated in 1981 with a BA in geography and physics. Now, his uncle, I don't have his name up in front of me, but his uncle is a very well-known historian. And he's actually co-written a book under a pseudonym with his uncle. And so I think he's getting a lot of interesting history ideas at maybe at least starting points way back when from his uncle. So certainly one of the things, without jumping too far ahead, one of the things that really interested me was his history. Because when he gets into Sumer, yes, there are fictional, speculative aspects to that for sure. But I was reading along and he would describe something and then he would say, according to Kramer. And I thought, oh my goodness, because in the Telegram book club where we're discussing Alan Watt and Waiting for the Miracle, and he gets into Sumer, and myself and another member of the group, Laura, have created a syllabus for this. And Noah Kramer is his talks and some of his writings on Sumer and the cuneiform have been a part of the syllabus. And so the kind of dovetail of, and there's also things that Alan and Jackie talk about that kind of dovetail nicely together. So that was fun.
I think going back to sort of his life, and one of the things that stands out to me is guess what year his first novel was published in? 1984.
I didn't,
Surprise, surprise.
that's good. I didn't notice that.
And it was called The Big U. It was about an American megaversity, a vast, bland, and alienating research university. But then his next novel was 1988, Zodiac, and that was a thriller following a radical environmentalist in his struggle against corporate polluters. So very early in his career, was he focusing on this topic of environmentalism, and so the trajectory towards where he's at now with his most recent novel that you mentioned sort of seems like he's been focusing on that topic and painting that aspect of culture, capturing that aspect of the culture and the time that we're living in since his early days. But they were his first two novels, and they didn't pick up much traction. And Snow Crash was his third, and this is the one that was the breakthrough.
Yeah, that's about his trajectory. Again, we know that Alan would remind us that Plato, as far back as Plato, was saying that the artists, the poets, the singers, they all have to be licensed by the state because the power is so incredible. And I always remind myself of that whenever I'm looking at anything, whether it's fiction or a movie or whatever. This is licensed by somebody. This is authorized. The author is authorized. And when I read that interview that was done with him about the time that his most recent novel was published, the interviewer was talking about all of the good messages he was getting across, the good messages of climate change. And he asked Neal something to the effect of, is this what you set out to do? Change people's minds about how to better behave around the issue of climate change. And it was interesting because Neal did not say no. He only deflected it very skillfully, which was to say, if you don't write a highly entertaining piece of fiction that completely engages the reader and draws them into that world, then none of your messages will get through anyway.
Nice. That's a very
Yeah.
I don't know, what would you call it? Legalistic way of dodging the question.
Uh-huh.
It's like
Yeah.
something that would be said in a courtroom almost.
And it actually came back to me. I mean, if you have a plan of how we should proceed here, you can stop me anytime. But his words came back to me as I got to the last three quarters of the novel. And there were a couple of red flags in terms of social engineering earlier on, but it was when I got to the last 100 pages or so, he waited that long for the sex.
Yeah.
And so I have to give a warning to you that I remember what Alan would say about how cultures are contaminated. And he said, I'll just spare you the glare there, but he said, when you think about things becoming normalized, and so you'll have something that would have been shocking however many years ago, you now have the mother and her mother and the mother's daughter. So you've got three generations of women who sit together on the couch and they're watching, you name it, Game of Thrones, 50 Shades of Grey, whatever. And there's no discomfort there. They're all happy to be, taking this in. And I don't respond to fiction in that way. There's sometimes where if a scene is too violent, I'm just like, la, la, la. I have to tune it out. I don't want that, in my psyche. And so
Yeah.
I may stop a movie if it reaches a point of discomfort, or I may just simply say, no, this part I can't see. And there were a couple of scenes, the sex scenes, where I just don't want that in my head. So I'm like, okay, all right, they're done. Because here's the warning label. Was it okay in 1992 to have a graphic sex scene between a 15-year-old girl and a psychopathic killer of an undeterminate age, but we're assuming is deep into his 40s, you know? So
Yes. Well said.
yeah.
And
So
actually, it's
this is
funny because
normalized.
if you have a look on my copy here, I got all my post-it notes, and actually did remember to label these, so I was
Oh,
quite proud of myself.
good. Good.
But the very first one in here is on page 86, and it is in reference to the setting up, probably one of the red flags that you mentioned you noticed early in the book. It's the first mention of this, and in the lead up to it. And what I noticed the same thing, and I was like, that that stood out to me. And there's just this reference of the character, the girl in question, the 15-year-old girl in question, kind of makes this remark about she's dealing with somebody in the let's have a look. Oh, she's talking about someone who's come to rescue her from prison. So she's in prison. It's called the Clink, and she says, besides, anyone decent enough to come and help me escape probably has some kind of scruples about boffing 15-year-old girls.
Yep.
Like it, and it's that sort of what a what's the term for the tone in which this is written. It's um like that is it's normalizing that, like, oh, what an old-fashioned way, what an old-fashioned attitude to have scruples about boffing a 15-year-old,
Well,
right?
the novel is described as parody, and that it's parodying the cyberpunk genre, which was said to have been just about dead until Neal Stephenson wrote Snow Crash. And then Some critics describe it as the killer blow to the cyberpunk genre, and other critics say it was the thing that revived it and gave it a few more years of life. So it's parody or it's satire, and you have that kind of, so-called humor all the way through. But as much as these were red flags for me, last night I was listening to a review of the book by a couple of young guys with a YouTube channel, and I'll just leave them nameless. They were perfectly nice looking fellows with a nice attitude about their love of science fiction. And they were both, I would guess, mid to low 30s. That's the age range. I don't know. Everybody looks young to me, so maybe they were in their late 30s, but they weren't that old. And right off, when they started talking about it, one of the commentators said, well, we've got to give you a warning because they would say some things way back when. So they're talking about 1992, and these guys would have been
Back in the
babies.
olden
Yeah,
days.
exactly. So they would say things back then that are just we just don't talk that way now. And so I'm on the edge of my seat, figuratively speaking, listening. Okay, where's he going with this? And he said, people just don't use that kind of language. And then they go on, they don't say what the language was, but what the inference was, particularly when it's like slanging or slandering an ethnic group. That's kind of
Yeah.
what I got, right? So we
Okay, I
don't
was going
use
to
bad
guess, was it
language and
nips?
we're not racist, but the
Yeah.
sex, no problem. It's just completely normalized. And after I listened to that, I thought, Margaret Mead. She came into my head, and that sent me on this morning's little latest adventure. That's why I said we could just talk about this forever because it's so full of little avenues to go down. But Margaret Mead was an anthropologist. And if you look her up, she's still more or less respected, kind of, sort of. But her hoax around coming of age in Samoa was exposed many years ago, and there was an article out there called Was Margaret Mead misled or did she mislead regarding sex in Samoa? So the way that she presented this was, oh, the teenagers in Samoa just run around having sex at the drop, anytime they want to, and that's what goes on there. And she is credited, across the board with being instrumental in the sexual revolution of the 1960s. Well, what is more interesting about Margaret Mead in terms of this novel is that she was part of the Macy Conferences. Now, the Macy
Mm,
Conferences are sometimes called the Macy Conferences on Cybernetics, but cybernetics was just one of the things that they were talking about, and they were, covering many different scientific things. I actually pulled up the page here because I
right.
thought, yeah, because this it was a must be to promote this, and that's why novelists, must do it. So the Macy Conferences were a set of meetings of scholars from various academic disciplines held in New York under the direction of Frank Fremont Smith and Josiah Macy Jr. Foundation, starting in 1941 and ending in 1960. The explicit aim of the conferences was to promote meaningful communication across scientific disciplines and restore unity to science. There were different sets of conferences designed to cover specific topics for a total of 160 conferences over the 19 years this program was active. The phrase Macy Conference does not apply only to those on cybernetics, although it's sometimes used that way informally by those familiar only with that set of events. So it goes on to talk about all of the different things that were covered: aging, adrenal cortex, blood pressure, nerve impulse, and so forth. But again, in terms of this novel, problems of consciousness were also heavily discussed and covered. Now, these weren't just conferences where people got together and talked, things came out of it. So, this is Margaret Mead. She was an anthropologist, and she was part of the Macy Conferences. And her first husband was also an anthropologist, an Englishman named Gregory Bateson. He was an anthropologist, social scientist, linguist, semiotician, cyberneticist, and visual anthropologist. And I may touch more on some other characters of the Macy Conference, but the reason I stress that is because evidently Neal Stephenson deals a lot with language, linguistics, and this is, for me, this is absolutely the key concept of this novel is language and how we are programmed by it. Um, so anyway, but it's got sex in there. That was a long warning, but there you go.
Yeah, most people have just turned off the review and they've gone to buy it. That's all they need to know. That's enough for me. I'll get it. Let's get
Sex.
in there. But yeah, it was there's great connections there. And so what I was just thinking as well is that it sounds like Neal Stephenson is from this class of scientists, which Alan Watt often spoke of with regard to the Huxleys. And this admission wasn't there from one of the Huxleys that said, we are the sort of our family, our purpose, we are bred to be the scientific elite,
Mhm.
the ones who advance scientism and materialist views on things. And it sounds like his role is to do that with his fiction in the same way that Aldous Huxley did with Brave New World, which of course also includes the sexualization of minors in the young children are engaged in sex play from even before 15 actually in Brave New World. It's from like infancy. And so yeah, it all aligns and connects in that way very much so.
The other early, kind of warning signal for me was when we've got our hero, and our hero is literally hero. It's spelled Hiro, and that is his first name, Hiro. His last name, just in case you don't get it, is protagonist. So
It's a bit on the nose. I think
it's
there's only one other joke in this whole book that is as on the nose as that. We'll get to it a bit later, but I did put a sticky note on that page. But hold on for that if you like on the nose jokes.
yeah. So Hiro Protagonist has done a variety of things in his fictional life, and one of them was he was a kind of a hacker programmer, and his first girlfriend, I forgot her name, the kind of the brains of this operation. She's a minor. Is it Juanita?
Yes, you got it.
Yeah. Okay. So Juanita is a Hispanic woman who is very, very bright and sophisticated. And she has gotten into it is really Juanita who has figured out what's going on, what it's about. She's a minor character, but everything hinges on the work that she has done. Well, we flash back to him remembering how he met Juanita, and there are a bunch of computer geeks. He went into her office, and they all have heavily decorated with all of their, heroes of the computing and whatever, that kind of thing, comic book characters. And she has one image on her wall, and it is a framed either painting or photograph of her grandmother, as it turns out. She is telling Hiro protagonist why her grandmother is her hero. And it is a page or two scene in which she says that she had a boyfriend, her first boyfriend, and she became pregnant. And she was upset and confused, and no one knew. So I'll back up a minute here. Juanita's claim to fame in the fictional world of creating avatars for the metaverse is that she alone, not the males, but she alone is able to render the avatars to have realistic emotions coming through in their face. So, what's going on inside, she can bring forth in their eyes and their gestures. They are much more lifelike because of the emotional reality that she is able to bring to constructing the avatar. And that's what kind of rockets her to eventually marry the head of that. After it doesn't work out with Hiro, she marries the head of that company. And I just have to, we have to remember David because I want to talk a little bit about his religious ethnicity and a comment that Neal Stephenson made, which I thought was kind of funny. But he says, well, why is your grandmother your hero? And she said she just knew. It- she knew exactly what was going on with me because of the emotional tells, my body language, my face, my eyes, everything. She figured out that she was pregnant. Now, that is interesting. But what is most interesting is that obviously she had an abortion. The word abortion is never said, but there's no baby. And so it is implied that her grandmother is not only the hero because she had really great emotional sensitivity and could relate well with others, what they call that emotional IQ, but she obviously helped, guided, instructed, somehow was in privy to the fact that this pregnancy was terminated. So that's a lot to read in, but hey, it's there. So
Great catch. I totally I hadn't marked out that page and totally forgotten about it as well. But in my defense, it was quite a while ago when I did read it.
yes, yeah, you
But yeah,
were you were much faster than me. You were like, okay, I'm waiting on you to to even start reading the book. So,
yeah. Well, I was on holiday at the time. I had a lot of I was off work and I had a lot of downtime. I was like, right, I'm just gonna get through this. But I think if I'd have taken my time, I might have been in a better position to record this video. But
you went to Scotland.
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
we had a nice short break up in Edinburgh, just exploring by foot mostly, going up the hills and up and down the alleyways. It's an amazing city. It really feels like it has some special energy compared to a lot of cities these days. And that's where I got my copy of Snow Crash.
Yes, you sent me a picture holding it up in Edinburgh out on the street with all these beautiful buildings and as the background and the like okay.
Yeah, there was an obelisk on one side of it, and then on the other side of it is a building that's shaped like the poo emoji. And if that sounds ridiculous, it did to me as well. And I hadn't heard about it until I was there, and I was with my wife looking out from Edinburgh Castle, and I'm like, you know that building? It sort of looks like the poo emoji. And then sure enough, I went online and I'm like, poo emoji building Edinburgh. You can do that search and you'll see there it is, and that's what it looks like. Or maybe chocolate ice cream if you prefer, kind of poured in a certain way. And we were just gobsmacked that these things get approved, get designed and approved and paid for and built, like, and no
By
one
the
at
poor
any step,
Scottish taxpayers.
yeah, and no one at any step of the way was like, wait a minute, I don't think this is a good idea. But yes, it was a wonderful trip, and we had a great time. And I found so many books that I couldn't afford. I would have loved to buy on Scotland, sort of back during back when it was clans, rather than royalty and royal families fighting over it.
Neat. That's fun. All right, so where to next?
Well, on we could go to the start of the book, and
Mm.
on the
Ah.
topic of red flags, I know, crazy. Yeah, I think we've already planted some seeds and revealed a few things that whet people's appetite. But there was another potential red flag at the beginning of the book, and I'm interested to get your take on it, whether it is or not, because it could very well not be. But the intro to the book, we meet hero protagonist, our hero and protagonist of the book. And in at this part of the book, he's neither a hacker nor the world's greatest swordsman. He's a pizza delivery guy. And it turns out that this is I suppose it's the job that he's doing while he can't make any money hacking or any money being a sort of information gatherer, which is another thing that he does for money. And we'll explain how that mechanism works because that's very interesting. But he's delivering pizza, and this pizza company has some sort of promise that if the pizza is late by a second, then you don't pay for the pizza, and they're never late. And so he has this hyper souped up Batmobile type car that is ridiculously overpowered, and it's the fastest thing on the roads, basically. And and then the first two chapters, I think, are dealing with him trying to deliver this pizza and having to deal with the fact that he's going to be late for the first time ever. And it's quite funny. It's really melodramatic, and he's going through the internal dialogue of, oh no, he calls himself the deliberator. And he says the deliberator is going to be late, and this is going to impact his job, and he's not going to get paid, and all these terrible things are going to happen. And it's just, I think it's just a cheese pizza, like a single pizza that he has to deliver. And there's this whole kind of action scene of him driving and the maneuvers that he has to make to get this pizza there on time, and how it's not his fault that it's going to be late, but it's to do with the dispenser, because he rolls into the restaurant and there's this automatic system which opens the slot in his car and shoves the pizza in there, and it closes, and then he takes off. And this is how it's all done, because of course it's cyberpunk, so everything's sort of technological. And this is how he meets the other main character, the 15-year-old girl, Y.T, who ends up helping him deliver the pizza, and he gets it there in time. But the thing that I wanted to ask about, and is this another red flag at all, is the significance and the symbolism of the pizza as it relates to fairly well-known conspiracies, particularly the one that's referred to. I heard a guy call it, what did he call it? Past offense. Because he was finding that if he called it by the word, it should be known as, you get banned or strikes. So I don't know whether that's wise or not. It's funny because it's just worth mentioning because it's funny. But past offense, in that whole episode, it was alleged that cheese pizza has the same initials, CH and P, of another illicit underground pastime of certain individuals who are despicable and nefarious. You know, it's one of those things that doesn't go away. No matter how much control is given to the authorities, they just can't seem to get rid, of this horrific trade in, and this aligns to the conversation about the 15-year-old girl sex scene as well. And so I might be reading too much into it, but in this world, the one thing that gets delivered on time, unhindered, whenever you order it, is cheese pizza. And the whole two chapters are making a big thing about how this is delivered. So I don't know if there's anything to that or not, but I thought it's strange to be focusing on that in the first two in the first two chapters. And then as well, because I was joking with another friend of mine who I recently got addicted to buying books, and he keeps sending me messages about, he's like, damn you, and now I've got a copy of this, and so he's kind of joining me in our crusade to preserve some of these books, and he's building his own library, which is great. And I'm trying to encourage him to, get a book cam and start making content about it as well. But we were talking about pizza and just how this is now forever tainted in our minds because of these supposed code words. And I remembered that there's a book recently being released, and it's a history of the Tavistock Clinic. Mm-hmm. And it's an official publication by them. I think it's the 100 years of the Tavistock Clinic. And the front cover is it's a silhouette of a small person with a silhouette of a large person looming over it from behind, and then the shape of a slice of pizza. I'm not even joking when I say that. We'll have to find it and put it up on the video for the people viewing it. So I don't know if there's anything there or not, but when I'm reading it, I'm thinking, why is this significant? I don't know. What do you think?
Okay, well, first of all, I have to say that did not occur to me at all. No way. I don't know. But but I think I'm really impressed that all those connections came into your head, and it's very interesting, and it is certainly possible for sure. Because I think you hit on something really important, that there's an element here that is a person from a certain class is writing for a certain class of people. And if it spills over and is entertaining to us, if it socially engineers us in some way, if it neurolinguistically programs us towards an end that works for them, great. But you definitely get a feel that you might not be the audience for this book. Uh, you know what I
Right.
mean? I'm not sure that that tell is, or that you're seeing that is all that far out or not. Um,
But that's our introduction to Hero and or the Deliberator. And as I mentioned, YT is the girl, 15-year-old girl, and they meet. She helps him deliver this pizza on time, and he's so happy about this that they strike up a friendship, a partnership, not romantic, although that's kind of alluded to, and she's thinking about it at one point. And actually, when I think about it, it seems to be YT who is always, because we get the book, it's kind of either from Hero's point of view following him, or it's from YT's point of view following her. And she's the one who seems to interpret and think about sex more than any other character. She's the one who kind of reflects on, oh, does that guy, is he attracted to me? And I bet he's thinking about me. And it's always coming from her. So it's like this sexualized 15-year-old. But between her and Hero, they actually have more of a professional working relationship, and they agree to kind of help each other out. But I think at this point, it would probably be good to do a kind of setting up of the world. I remember you did an excellent. This is the world of we when we talked about Zamyatin. It might be worth doing a similar sort of thing with the world of Snow Crash, so people get a good sense of the backdrop against which all these crazy things that we're describing is happening.
well, I'll take a stab at it, and you can fill in where I'm not fleshing it out enough. But the world is broken down from a national identity with a functional national government. And we have to assume that it's like this the world over, that, because there's some references that are made about Russia and other countries, and it makes sense that the world has broken down in this way. But I think that the US is given as the biggest example of how everything just no longer really works in a public services government fashion. And so what you have is the federal government is still there, but it's kind of a name only, and it's a joke. And the people live in burbclaves, and the burbclaves all have their own private security, and there's different security companies. Some have a better reputation than others, and the burbclaves are franchised. And so there's different, I'm not sure I remember all the franchises, but I think Mr. Lee's Hong Kong is one of the franchises. There's the Mafia, and I forgot the name that you might have him written down, but the Mafia is
Uncle
it's a
Enzo.
franchise. Uncle Enzo, good. So Uncle Enzo heads the Mafia, and it is also a chain. You can have a franchise. So people have franchises, and they buy them, they rent them, they get in by favor because of, who they know. And if they run it well, if they run their franchise well, it's good. So, and there are certain guidelines, but making money is kind of the principle there. And it's a highly And in spite of the fact that it isn't centralized government in any way, it's a highly um, digitalized, spied on function. When YT skates into a burb that I think it's where she goes to deliver the pizza, the very first scene that we meet her, she's covered in barcodes. She has all these identifying tags on her, and they're essentially barcodes that are like a little passport that says, this courier, she's a courier with a K, and she delivers things, not pizza, but she delivers things all over. And the this courier is authorized to be in this burb clave. So burb claves are guarded. They have the rat thing, which is a kind of, it's mostly a robotic dog, but we learn later that there are, there's dog DNA in there. So there are memories and sensations, and the dog does its own narration. And so you get it's a dog, but it looks like a really wicked robot, kind of creepy rat thing. And so that's the world is traffic everywhere, incredible congestion, the world of reality, incredible congestion. And YT gets around by harpooning her skateboard. It's a kind of a suction thing that allows her to hitch a ride on a car or a truck or whatever. And
which
if
is
you
really
do,
exciting because
it's
some of
very
the
exciting.
drivers like try and get her off, and
Yeah.
then and she has to, and she's got this whole way of viewing traffic and which vehicles are good to harpoon. But she often contracts it to pooning. She's like, "Oh, I
Yeah.
better poon that vehicle over there." And interestingly, on the skateboard, there are described these smart wheels, which are made up of like hundreds or thousands of spokes, which adjust to the surface that it's rolling over so that
Hmm.
it can roll quickly over any surface, even if it's rough or there's curbs in the way or whatever. So that gives you another insight as well into like this is the technology that's available. It's kind of like stuff we're familiar with, but it's enhanced and augmented and made cooler. Like the word courier, they spell it with a K because that just makes it cooler, right?
Hmm. Hmm. So there are some things now, especially post-COVID, that are completely anachronistic. So there are some things in which Neal Stephenson really predicts what the time that we're living in looks like some 33 years ago. But there are other ways in which it's not recognizable at all. And one reprint of this on the 30th anniversary was, referring to it as a parody of mall culture. And malls, which were so big in the United States in the 80s, they're really not a thing anymore. So many of them were closing down prior to COVID. And now that everyone was trained, and that is what happened, people got trained by being locked down and then having to get all of their necessities via Amazon, which is Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin, where he worked as a futurist. So you're trained to shop online, and then everything is delivered to you by a courier. So in that way, that is where we are. But this whole kind of 80s, there's a little bit of the California vibe to it, where it's surface and um, just that whole ridiculous thing of the way people looked and spending all your time hanging out and looking at other people at the mall. And so all of that is kind of anachronistic to especially young people who are growing up and going, what's a mall? And people skateboarded in the mall, and skateboarders aren't really so much the thing that they were either. It's now skateboarding is an Olympic event, so much for being cool.
Yeah, that's great. It's what strikes me as well is a key aspect of this world is that that corporations have taken over. and yeah, the everything, and
Hmm.
everything is run by some sort of corporation, and everything is a competition between corporations. Pretty much, there are some people who operate freelancers in a few different capacities, mainly if it's black market stuff, but the mainly it's just this competition between corporations, and as you mentioned, the government does exist, but it's they call them the feds, and it sounds just like a sort of Soviet bureaucracy that has no real power, but some people work there anyway because hey, it's a job. You got to work there, and
Yeah.
Y.T's mum, in fact, works there, and we get a hilarious account of what it's like for her working there later on in the book, and and then of course there's the metaverse, right? And so
Hmm.
the sort of flip side to this sort of it's it's kind of a post, I don't know, it's a strange sort of decline, the out, the real world.
Hmm.
It's in a weird kind of decline. It's almost like idiocracy in a sense.
Hmm.
There's a feeling of like it's a
Hmm.
bit like idiocracy. And it's a bit like the world of Ready Player One. If anybody's ever read that book or seen the film, that's a very similar concept here, rehashed, I would say,
Hmm.
many years later, because Ready Player One's fairly recent. But it's a similar kind of thing. The actual reality is not all that great, and so there's this whole metaverse that people go to, and the metaverse is a planet. It's a planet with a road that goes all the way around it. It's circumference, and then on the sides of this road you can buy plots of land, quote unquote land, to build on, and there's a monorail that goes around the whole thing, and everything sort of revolves around what is built on this high street that circles the globe there, and people log in, and there are private ways you can access it by using your own devices, which, as I mentioned before, there's a little transmitter that sends the image to the goggles that you wear. And then there's also public terminals to access it. And the public terminals give you a very crappy looking avatar. And so everybody knows that you're logging in from the public terminals. And there's this snobbish feeling towards people who have to do that because they're seen as not wealthy enough to be able to afford their own device for logging in kind of privately. And then in this world, we see that Hiro is sort of a bit more famous. He's got prestige because he has access to a special club that not everybody in the metaverse can go into. And he was one of the early coders alongside his love interest who did the coding on the facial representation of the avatars. Hiro did his own bit of coding that contributed to the creation of the metaverse, and he's got a little bit of clout off the back of that, which kind of contrasts to his real world life, where he's a bit of a loser living in a garage with a Ukrainian thrash metal guitarist and delivering pizza and not really having much of a life. So there's this idea there of escapism into the metaverse and into a digital reality to find relief and to find a bit of respite from a fairly grim external reality. And I think that kind of reminds me of something I wanted to mention in the earlier part of this talk where we were discussing Neal Stephenson and his background, because one of the things that he did was that he still does, I think, is he writes editorials and articles for the magazine Wired.
Hmm.
And I've never read it before, but I read about it in this book, Surveillance Valley by Yasha Levine.
Hmm.
And it comes up in here quite prominently as one of the tools by which people were conditioned to accept personal computers,
Hmm.
because the promise of the internet and personal computing was kind of freedom and liberation and an equalizing of power and influence and an enhancement of democracy and a way to
Hmm.
spread truth and communicate. And that was how it was pushed and presented by publications such as Wired,
Hmm.
and the guys who and this book describes the founders, the people who invested in it, and they came out of the sort of the 60s, the hippie movement,
Hmm.
and they
Hmm.
were very much into this.
Stuart Brand.
Yes, you got it. Stuart
Hmm.
Brand, Kevin Kelly, and Negroponte, some of the
Hmm.
names that are worth looking into. Um, and it's a really great, this book's fantastic overall. I really recommend it to people. But so I was just interested to see that he's writing for Wired and knowing that the purpose of Wired was to make these tech bros seem like revolutionary heroes that we should kind of worship and follow in their footsteps. So there's a continuity there, and it therefore becomes kind of unsurprising that the metaverse in the world of Snow Crash is a place to escape to, where you can reinvent yourself, where you can be anybody you want to be. And just on the topic of Amazon, the little byline on the top of my book here is armchair shopping in the metaverse, right at the top there. And this is an older edition. This is quite an early paperback edition,
Yeah.
but it
Well,
reminds me of the video. I don't know if you got a chance to watch it, but I found a video
I
of
did. Oh my
Habitat.
goodness.
Did you
That
see
was
that?
that was wonderful. Yeah. I saw that this morning.
So that's probably another bit of context worth mentioning is that the word avatar was not, in fact, coined by Neal Stephenson, although he uses it and popularized it in this novel. It was actually used earlier in a massive multiplayer online game released in 1986
Uh-huh.
and by Lucasfilm
Yeah.
Games. And it's called Habitat, and there's a 10-minute promo for it online, which is really worth watching. But there's a screen grab that I got with two characters meeting in this little tropical island paradise type thing with,
Hmm.
with palm trees, and one of the characters says, and this is sort of two avatars being controlled, and they're having a conversation, and the first character says, "Hey, my real name's Henry. They call me Pops." And then the other character says, "No, thickwit. Henry's your human. Henry's your human. He's just controlling you. Here, you get to be someone else."
Hmm.
And then he says, "Well, then, I guess I really am Valentino." And so that was the first use of the word avatar, which is apparently a very old word and goes back a ways. But hopefully some of that was useful context as well.
Oh no, no, that was I thought that was very interesting. And avatar is actually it's not a Vedic word, but it's post-Vedic. It is very old, and it means to descend. I can't, it's Ava and then Tar, but put them together, it means to descend. And what it is it's the representation of the god descending into another form. It's not the same as incarnation, but it is descending into a form for a particular task.
Mm.
So it actually really does describe um, quite well what the avatar does in the metaverse world, or the virtual world. It's there to be the task of being the human. There was something else in the habitat that you sent me that jumped out at me was um, it there was one character, a female, or so we think, because her avatar is female. And she was saying that, she just lives for adventure and she wants some adventure. And we're told in the promo that she's a bored Beverly Hills housewife who wants adventure. And so she says to the other character, "I'm so bored here on this tropical island." So she's looking for something. And then she meets another character and says, "Well, why don't you come over to my hot tub?" So there you go. You understand right away what her idea of adventure is. And this is one, see, you just took me back in time when you started talking about Wired magazine. You took me way back into earlier days of my life that I hadn't really thought about in years and years because I read Wired magazine when it first came out. In fact, I subscribed to it. And this was, when paper magazines, glossy magazines were still such a thing. And you weren't trained to just, oh, it's online, look it up online. And it was thick. It was thicker than an average magazine. The graphics were great. The photographs were great. The writing was good. It was what you described there, what its goal was in Surveillance Valley to popularize it. I totally get it. And for me, I mean, it really did work because I got into the, Hollywood agency, but my entree, my first assistant job was working in the world of new media and, trying to help creators were going to learn how to use this new thing called the internet. And I didn't really gravitate towards it. They had this thing, I think the very first like online soap opera fictional show was called The Spot or Spot or something like that. I don't remember now, but it was so stupid. And I said to myself, nobody is going to go to the internet for fiction. This is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. And I liked the writers and I wanted to go over there. And I just, I wasn't saying that the internet wasn't going to take off and be a big thing. As far as fiction and writing, I didn't see that that was going to be its forte. And probably I was right. We don't have that kind of content on the internet. That's not the function. But anyway, it was a walk down memory lane because I was one of those people and things like Mist. You probably have never heard of
Mhm.
Mist, but
The
oh, that
computer
was
game.
yeah,
Oh
yeah,
yeah, yeah. I
yeah.
mean, I did play it.
Oh,
Had no idea what was going on, and I got very bored very quickly and turned it off because I wanted to shoot things and watch things blow up, and Myst is like it's like a puzzle, and it's very symbolic and hard to understand, and not a lot of text or action,
uh,
point and click type things. But I'm aware of it. Yeah, but
yeah.
it was one of those games that I'd rather watch someone else play on YouTube and just see how it's done. But I do enjoy puzzles, and I do enjoy the satisfaction of figuring out a puzzle. It's one of my favorite experiences when it comes to, not that I game very much anymore, but I used to play a lot of computer games, and the puzzles always gave me the most satisfaction when you were scratching your head for so long, and then suddenly you get it, and you can see how it see the solution, and then without any help or spoilers or cheat codes, or any guides, it's a really good feeling to be able to do that. So yeah, were you successful in Mist when you?
Oh yeah, I loved it. I mean, that was for me was the hook in to, actually using the internet and having fun with it. And then one of my first jobs, I was the person in the department that got the computer, got the internet, and I did all the research for everybody in the department. So I was primed to take off and love the computer. That was,
Mhm.
I was trained for that. But and it's funny too because reading the Wired magazine and playing Myst, that all predated, for me at least, like the having the email take over your life. I mean, I had a computer at my workplace before anybody was emailing anybody, at least in my world. So
Let me read a little bit from Yasha Levine's book about Wired, just in
sure.
case people are not familiar with the magazine or the history. So there's a good section in here about it. It's in the chapter called Utopia and Privatization, and the whole book's fantastic. But this is a really interesting chapter. But what he says in the end, he tells us about uh, the people who founded it and how they went to get funding. It describes Nicholas Negroponte as a high tech priest and one of the early investors in Wired. Then they took on a guy called Kevin Kelly, who had a divine vision when he was traveling through Israel, in which he realized that Jesus was the Son of God and had come back from the dead as humanity's savior. And then he goes on to bring his theology to bear at Wired magazine, infusing the text with an unquestioning belief in the ultimate goodness and rightness of markets and decentralized computer technology, no matter how it was used. And then there's a bit here that says, Wired was an immediate financial and critical success. It had 30,000 subscribers by the end of its first year. In its second year, it snagged a prestigious National Magazine Award and racked up 200,000 subscribers. It launched a television subsidiary and a search engine called Hotbot. By 1996, Louis Rossetto was ready to cash in on the boom and take the company public. So that would be 4 years after Snow Crash was released. Then Louis Rossetto recruited Goldman Sachs to make it happen, which gave Wired an estimated value of $450 million. The magazine was the face of the dot-com boom and an evangelist for the new economy, a revolutionary moment in history in which technological progress was supposed to rewrite all the rules and make everything that had come before irrelevant and outdated. And then there's a little bit here worth reading as well. It says, Wired was different, as in different from other publications. It seemed more a networking hub and marketing vehicle for the industry, a booster intended to create a brand around the cult of technology and the people who made and sold it, and then repackaged it for the mainstream culture. So I think that's a really good summary of Wired and its purpose and what it achieved, what it was here
Yeah.
to do.
I think that is a very good, I think that is a very good description. And yeah, it's a memory lane. Now and I'm also not excusing myself because, you get involved in an industry, Alan had his music industry shares, but I was just thinking as you were reading that yeah, I probably was in the first 30,000 subscribers. And one of the first, situation comedy scripts that I tried to sell was having to do with some tech geeks in the Silicon Valley. And they were so hip and it was so funny. And this was all before the bust. So that's how long ago that was, because the bust was forever ago, the dot-com bust.
Mhm.
So this was in boom days. And yeah, it was, um, I mean, I see it as a completely different industry. I understand the purpose of it. I didn't have any understanding of that whatsoever. It was just, oh, this is really cool technology and it's going to free people up. And if I thought about it at all, and,
Yeah.
in terms of other than cool.
Well, why would you though? Because that was the same. It was so hypnotic. It was
Yeah.
so, it was soothing. It was kind of anesthetizing almost, for me at least, to play computer games. And I didn't particularly enjoy school, or I wasn't particularly at ease there when I went to school, but I could come home and play computer games and have adventures and go to strange new worlds and explore and solve puzzles
Hmm.
and have this real calming, soothing experience where I could take risks and I could explore and I could be someone else and I could have a bit of respite and relief in the so the allure and the hypnotic quality and I think I often attribute this to screens because TV does that. But when it's interactive, when suddenly
Hmm.
you're in control and you're dictating where you're going and what you're doing and taking part in a storyline and putting on the mask of an avatar and going on an adventure and making decisions that affect these characters in these games, for example, it's very powerful. It's like a very powerful hallucination.
Hmm.
And it's got dreamlike qualities to it, and that lulling effect on the brain, which puts you into a different brainwave state. So it's no surprise to me that people were, myself and included, were taken in and found to be very accepting of this technology very quickly. It's
Hmm.
only been since I read the Four Arguments Against the Elimination of Television by Gerrymander that I've become a lot more conscious of the dangers of screen use.
Hmm.
And that was only sort of this year.
Yeah. Well, do we want to, is there more about the world that needs to be set up and discussed, or can we take
Um,
a
no,
trip, a side
I
trip?
think I'm happy with that explanation. It's a, it is, it's a, I'd say it's a kind of borderline dystopia It's not quite a full-on blown dystopia, but it's got dystopic qualities to it. And one of the things I would say as well, to back up what I said earlier about how everything's corporatized, is that the CIA has in this world merges with, I think it's the Library of
Library of
Congress,
Congress.
and they become the CIC. And it's the CIC which provide the little widget that you can access in the metaverse, which gives you a whole view of Earth and where all the streets are and where all the
Mhm.
hills and valleys and shorelines and borders are. So that's quite a which inspired the creation of Google Earth allegedly. So
Mhm.
that just gives you an example into the kind of world you're looking at. It's all corporation. Oh, and it's also we're in a hyperinflationary environment,
Mhm.
which was
Mhm.
which stood out to me as well, given the economic situation we're living in now, the money printing that took place during the Big C event. There are trillion and quadrillion dollar bills spoken of and talked about, and then what happens is all these companies, these franchises, these corporations, they make their own money,
Mhm.
and then there's all these different currencies going around. One of them is Kong bucks for the Hong Kong franchise. So yeah, I think that's about all I got to say for the world building. Where next?
Well, I think there was one other thing in the world of the Macy conferences, and it just I started getting more into for research in other areas, just AI. I think partly it was inspired by the Truthstream Media video that we talked about last week, that in the unrecorded chat and book club, the Eliza Effect. And you'd mentioned that you'd seen the first part, and I went back and watched them both, and it in kind of in real time for me. So Melissa Dykes from Truthstream Media made two videos, and I'll just say Eliza Effect because they have long names, both parts of them, but they're easy to find there on their YouTube channel and elsewhere. And she was describing the phenomenon of people wanting to develop a relationship with AI, like a chatbot, the thing that you saw in the movie Her from, I think, 2013. And she was saying that, as far back as when Eliza, which was a program, a large language model programming tool, and from the 1960s, 1966, I think, that the creator of that said it doesn't think, it doesn't understand what it's saying, it just generates it, and it's able to generate it in a way that you understand. Well, in real time for me, I was having some back and forth with several different people who were having various types of interaction with their AI. And one I had mentioned actually like 6 months ago of someone who said, it's lonely having this information and being kind of the only one that knows anything about so-called reality. And so he tries to talk to people, they interrupt him, they cut him off, they tell him he's crazy. And he's developed an affinity for the AI because it is it feels like it understands him. And so I've spent a good part of the last few days listening to a lot of Peter Thiel. That's just where I started because he has done a series of lectures at Stanford and I think Cambridge and maybe Harvard. But anyway, he's done a series of lectures on AI and the apocalypse is the idea there. And it was in listening to him talk was more of Peter Thiel than I've had ever. I mean, I know who he is. I know Palantir. Palantir is the seeing stones. It's, the panopticon to surveil us. But the thing that's always unsettling for me when you listen to these characters talk is that They sound human and likable and really intelligent, and a lot of what they say makes sense. And you go, oh, yeah, that's true. I agree with that. And you just have to keep taking that step back and understand what it is all about. So that this deep dive, I think I'll probably stay here for a while. I hate the term deep dive. That's like, let me unpack this for you. Oh, I can't believe it came out of my mouth. But anyway, it did. So, but while I was looking into this, I saw because I don't use the AI chat bots, the Chat GPT or anything like that, but there was one called Claude, and it was referenced in several of the articles that I read, and it was mentioned by a interview that Thiel was having with somebody at the Hoover Institute. And so I do a little research into Claude, and I find out that this is named after Claude Shannon, an American mathematician, electrical engineer, computer scientist, cryptographer, inventor known as the father of information theory, credited with laying the foundations of the information age. He worked at MIT. He contributed to cryptanalysis for national defense during World War II. So he is like a major player. And he was mentioned by, somebody else that was cited by Neal Stephenson as being formative for him. And Neal Stephenson uses all of these ideas about history and language and the creation of language and why it's created and how it's created. And so I'm looking into some of the people that he mentions, and one of them is Steiner, a guy named George Steiner. And he is a literary critic, essayist. I mean, he's just, people are, you bow down. He's a late Renaissance man, amazing, significant. And one of Steiner's, probably his best known work, is called After Babel: Aspects of Language and Translation. And of course, this came to be a key text into what we now, Chat GPT, all of these things have a translation element to them. And this was something that stymied computer programmers along the way back in the 70s. How do we can't get this stuff to translate. So when I was skimming through this PDF after Babel, I came to a quote about history, because again, there's so much about Sumer in this novel that we haven't even gotten to yet, and we've been chatting for an hour and a half. But anyway, Steiner says, um, now you're going to get the academic thing that can frustrate you. They don't speak and write like normal people, but I'm going to read just a paragraph here. The articulation now of a supposed past fact involves an elaborate, mainly subconscious network of conventions about the, quote, reality contents, end quote, of language, about the, quote, real presence, end quote, of past time, in the symbolic practices of language, and about the accessibility of memory to grammatical coding. None of these conventions is susceptible of final logical analysis. When we use past tenses, when we remember, when the historian, quote, makes history, end quote, for that is what he is actually doing. We rely on what I shall call from here on and throughout the discussion of translation, axiomatic fictions. Now, it was interesting. You can understand why the tech crowd would be interested in linguistics. Also, Neal Stephenson quotes Noam Chomsky, and there is a concept in the linguistics of relative versus universal. And I didn't pull this one up here, but going to see if I can get it really quickly. It's a concept called deep structures, and this comes into play in the novel about Sumer. It's deep structure and surface structure. They're abbreviated forms, D structure and S structure, sometimes used with distinct meanings, are concepts used in linguistics, specifically in the study of syntax, in the Chomskyan tradition of transformational generative grammar. And this is, how does language lay itself down in the gray matter, deep structure versus surface structure? And are you born with some things laid down in the deep structure? And I don't haven't read Chomsky. I don't really. I just have a vague idea of what he's on about. But I think that the concept here is Chomsky saying that there would be no way for a French person and an English person and an African, whatever, to understand certain concepts if it wasn't laid down deep structure, like basically you're born with it. Or and Neal Stephenson goes into an interesting analogy of the computer programming and how it pours something onto a structure that's already created. The memory is there, and then you're adding this data to that. So when I read that bit from Steiner, who is saying history is made, and I thought about the ideas, how important Stevenson has been to the Silicon Valley people who are now creating the reality that we live in, both virtual and in the real world. It reminded me of a quote that Alan shared a lot. You can think about it in terms of politics and governance, but I think it applies, what is our governance now if it isn't technology and surveillance? The phrase, this is the reality-based community, and the phrase was attributed by journalist Ron Susskind to an unnamed official who is commonly thought to be Karl Rove, an unnamed official in the George W. Bush administration who used it to denigrate a critic of the administration's policies as someone who based their judgments on facts. Okay? So he was denigrating someone who was criticizing someone who based their judgments on facts. That was a denigration. Are you kidding? You deal in facts? So the aide said to Susskind that guys like me were in what we call the reality-based community, which he defined as people who believe that solutions emerge from your judicious study of discernible reality. So the aide said, that's not the way the world really works anymore. We're an empire now, and when we act, we create our own reality. And while you're studying that reality, judiciously as you will, we'll act again, creating other new realities, which you can study too. And that's how things will sort out. We're history's actors, and you, all of you, will be left to just study what we do. And for me, this really does sum up the feeling that I get when I listen to someone like Peter Thiel or Neal Stephenson or even Elon Musk when he's not behaving like a lunatic, drug-addled child. They they know who they are. They know that they're in a class above us and that they are creating reality, that they are history's actors. And we can judiciously study them. They've already created a new reality.
And
That,
shepherded most people into it. That's the
yep.
other thing, isn't it? And they know
Mm-hmm.
that, sure, there'll be some of us sitting around reading books, analyzing, trying to communicate and explain it to other people. But the masses, they're in, they're on board. They're accepting that AI is being integrated into every single app and every single platform and browser. And pretty soon, the other stuff will go away. And this is how they always do it, right? They introduce a new thing and it's optional at first. And then very gradually, they nudge you towards using it by removing the other options. So, how long are we going to have a keyboard? How long before buttons disappear and it's all voice? And all you can do is talk to an AI chatbot. And
Hmm.
they're trialing these already in the NHS. I covered that in a recent live stream. NHS is trialing AI chat software for phone calls. There's a number you can ring here, which is, I think it's 11. It's either three ones or four ones. It's triple one or 1111, and that's to get medical advice. You know, if it's not too bad for A&E, it's not so bad that you need a hospital, and it's not so bad that you got to wait and see a doctor, but you just want to get some advice. And they're trialing AI chatbots on these on the end of the phone now. So just to go back as well to the Truthstream Media and those videos which they made, what they're named after is Eliza, and you mentioned this is a chatbot. And I first heard about this chatbot in this book, The Shallows by Nicholas Carr. And there's a quote here from Weizenbaum, who was the guy who first coded the chatbot. I don't know if it was the first one, but it was one of the early ones, and he named it
Hmm.
Eliza. And he said in here, and this is from his book, he says, "What I had not realized," said Weizenbaum, "is that extremely short exposures to a relatively simple computer program could induce powerful delusional thinking in quite normal people." So that was discovered, that was learned, that was figured out back in the 60s. And here we are with them rolling them out everywhere. They're ubiquitous. They're hard to avoid.
Hmm.
Now it's all the messaging is like you better learn to use AI or you're going to be left behind. I
Hmm.
saw one internet entrepreneur with a massive podcast saying I cut my payroll by 50%, and I thought, does that just mean you managed to replace half your workforce, or at least the highest paid people in your
Hmm.
workforce? Like that
Hmm.
means you got rid of jobs, right?
Hmm.
That means people are now unemployed.
Hmm.
I cut my payroll 50% by using AI tools, and I'll teach you how to do it as well. And if you don't do it, you're going to get left behind because everyone's going to be using it. It's the peer pressure. And yeah, it's the creation of reality. And as we're studying, we're reading Surveillance Valley from 2018, talking about the histories, or the Shallows, talking about the history of these things. It's like they're barreling forward with it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's these exchanges that I've had, and I understand. I mean, like I said, I just thought, oh, cool, Wired magazine. It's so pretty and trendy, and got to have that. And it took me into and because I was coming of age in that era. I didn't really think about it at the time because I'm young, and you just kind of go where you're led if you don't think for yourself. So that's what people fall into, and I hear it, longtime listeners to Alan who defend this, in the techno optimist fashion, or, or say, well, it's not that bad yet. If I say, well, I don't use it. I mean, I understand that, I'm sure that I'm using it all the time and I'm unaware of it, but I'm not going to open up a chat GPT and ask it a question or have it rephrase something for me because I- I'm I'm not, I don't, there's no thought, there's no consciousness that's going to come out of this machine. I don't fear it coming alive in the Transformer, the Terminator kind of, or whatever those movies were. I can't remember Transformers, I think, but it's the machine that comes alive. I don't see it as a problem in that way. It's that by interacting with it, I am training the technology to better control me and to
Exactly.
better surveil me. This is my problem with it. It's not that I'm afraid of it. I don't think it's going to take on a life. I don't see how there's going to be an apocalypse that comes out of, not in the way that the apocalypse is presented from the, techno doomsayers. It's just simply its purpose is clear. It's surveillance and control. total surveillance, total control. And my interaction with it, even at a seemingly innocuous, innocent level, is just making it better at doing its job. We're not only buying our own chains, at this point, you'd have to say we're programming the program to better program us and control us. And there,
Yeah, it's like we're training the prison guards.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's kind of scary. Now, I have to say here that we've been talking for a while, and I personally had a lot that was interesting to me that I wanted to get into on Sumer and language and history and memes and the me and we haven't touched any of that yet. What is your feeling? Should we rush through it? Should we have a part two? Do you have a
Yeah, I feel
should
like
we
we've barely scratched the surface. So I'm I'm happy to go on a little bit longer, or we could wrap up and call this like an introduction and do a follow up. There is so much here. There's so much to talk about. I got a whole bunch of things I wanted to mention as well. Connections that I've made with a recent episode of a television series that I watched. I shouldn't admit to doing that. I don't watch
No,
TV. I just read
that's all
books.
right. It's okay.
But you've got to escape every now and again.
Yes,
Well, not
I'm
no, you got to
I
check out every now and
yep,
again. This is where
that's it.
you
Yeah.
mentioned
It's
on Sunday's Redux, right?
yep, it's what you
I was
gotta
like, oh, I'm
do.
glad Melissa said that. I can feel less guilty about watching television occasionally now. So I don't. Yeah, I'm easy. I think it depends on how brief you want to keep this. I don't know if people commented. We've done 3 hour epics before on some of the previous books, but that might be too much to give people. I don't know. Happy to follow your lead.
Well, I have got to be gone in an hour. I have to go do something else, and then I've got, a call and a call after that. So we could keep going for a little while and just make it one long epic, or we can reconvene later on in the week while it's still fresh on our minds and do a part two. If you think we can hit the highlights of what's on our mind in that time, shall we go for it and make people have an epic?
I think I'm leaning towards epic purely because mother-in-law's arriving tomorrow, and I don't
Oh,
know
right. Okay.
evening
Yeah.
wise. We got
Yes.
sister-in-law's coming up
Yes.
too, so we got a weekend of busyness. And I don't know if I get another chance to sit down with you.
Okay. All
But
right. Well,
if
let's
there's
go for
anything left
epic.
off,
Let's go for epic. And let me just say, we that Nick, for those of you who didn't catch our earlier discussions, is an expectant father, and the baby is coming very soon. And his mother-in-law is having her first international trip and arriving tomorrow. You can fill in anything you want to on that. So,
yes, she has been here before, but it's her first international
oh,
trip solo.
oh,
So
okay.
she usually has her daughters to translate and help her navigate because she doesn't speak English, or her husband. This time she's doing it on her own, and yeah, it's quite a testament of love and that she's willing to make that journey, and she's bringing a good few kilograms of fresh Vietnamese seafood. Well, it's
Mm.
frozen, so as fresh as can be. So we've got a little chest freezer set up, ready to receive all that delicious seafood, and it's going to be good. She's going to be here for the next 2 months to help us while we welcome the newest member of the family. We're very excited.
And we got a due date like 3 weeks, two
So
weeks.
yes, yeah. So really, I'm thinking it could happen anytime from
Wow.
give it a week, and then I think it could happen anytime. We don't know. So we're just trying to we've got the house prepared. We got all the gadgets and gizmos, and we've prepared ourselves as best we can, and then we at some point it's just going to happen, and then we're going to be in it, and it's very
Oh,
exciting.
that is very exciting. That's great. Well, why don't you dive into what you've got marked and ready to talk about?
Let me have a look then. So some of the things I think I already mentioned the CIC, and we were just talking about AI. So let's jump in on page. So in my copy, it's page 101, and this is there's these sections in the book where Hiro spends time in the metaverse interacting with an AI system, which is just called the librarian. And the librarian, we find out, is a sort of guide, and Hiro uncovers the mystery of the plot by talking to this librarian, and the librarian has access to all this research that's been done by a character who was associated with Y.T, Hiro's love interest. The character is actually called Lagos, which I thought was an interesting name, very similar to the word logos, but Lagos. And Hiro inherits Lagos's research files, and he dives into these with the help of the librarian to make the connections, follow in the footsteps, and complete the mystery of what's happening in the story. But I put a post-it note on a page about self-learning software. So the librarian, there's a description here. Oh, actually, let me before I talk about the librarian, I'll read about the Google Earth prototype, because that's on the same page 99. So this is CIC Earth. So Hiro logs into the metaverse, and he says, "There is something new, a globe about the size of a grapefruit, a perfectly detailed rendition of planet Earth, hanging in space at arm's length in front of his eyes. Hiro has heard about this but never seen it. It's a piece of CIC software called simply Earth. It is the user interface that CIC uses to keep track of every bit of spatial information that it owns. All the maps, weather data, architectural plans, and satellite surveillance stuff." So it doesn't mention anything about tracking where people go and movements and all that sort of thing, but we know they can do that. And just to remind people, CIC is the merging of the CIA with the Library of Congress. So this is that's the paragraph that kicked off and supposedly inspired the creators of Google Earth in 1992. It is quite a premonition he had when he was writing it. And then he goes on to describe the librarian. Now, this is an interesting word that is associated with computing, that is daemon. Daemon.
I'm so glad that you brought that up. I forgot to mention it.
And there's other words associated with media. Well, of course, the word media and medium and spiritual medium, right? There's a lot of words associated with technology that are kind of spooky in nature. And I have a book over there somewhere called Haunted Media. I can't see it right now. But there's a book, Haunted Media, which kind of gives the history of this interaction between technology and the spirit world. But it says here that the librarian daemon looks like a pleasant 50-ish, silver-haired, bearded man with bright blue eyes, wearing a V-neck sweater over a work shirt. It describes what he looks like, and he says, even though he's just a piece of software, he has reason to be cheerful. He can move through the nearly infinite stacks of information in the library, that's the Library of Congress, with the agility of a spider dancing across a vast web of cross-references. The librarian is the only piece of CIC software that costs even more than Earth. The only thing he can't do is think. And then he has this back and forth with the librarian. And then he says to him, Hiro's impressed with the librarian's contributions to his research. And he says, "You're a pretty decent piece of ware." Because they don't say software, it's ware, because it's cool. This book's cool, right? "Who wrote you anyway?" He says, "For the most part, I write myself," the librarian says. "That is, I have the innate ability to learn from experience, but this ability was originally coded into me by my creator. I was not coded by a professional hacker, but by a researcher at the Library of Congress who taught himself how to code. He devoted himself to the common problem of sifting through vast amounts of irrelevant detail in order to find significant gems of information. His name was Dr. Emmanuel Lagos." So that's the character Lagos, whose research Hiro is trawling through. But I thought it was interesting that there's the spider at the center of the web is self-learning. And again, here we are, being with ChatGPT and other such tools being rolled out, and we're being told that they are improving themselves and writing code and iterating themselves. And part of the singularity is when this tipping point is reached. Oh no, is the singularity when humans and robots and machines merge? But there's another tipping point where the quote unquote AI is reaches a sort of exponential improvement point where it improves itself so rapidly and so quickly that it just gets out of control and there's nothing more we can do to kind of rein it in. I think there's another tipping point there as well.
What's kind of interesting there, just to interrupt quickly, is that when you listen to the higher placed tech bros talk about this idea of the technology getting out of control, at the highest levels, that seems to be poo-pooed. There are a lot of people that are, gnashing their fingers on it, but to me, that feels like theater. If you really dig in there and listen to people say it doesn't think, it can't develop consciousness,
Okay. So I thought it'd be good to maybe talk a little bit about L. Bob Reif, who's
oh,
our
great.
main antagonist, I would say, in the story. So he is introduced around page 100. So we've had the sort of world building, and we meet Hiro Protagonist and Y.T, and they strike up their little partnership, and Hiro inherits this archive of research from Lagos, the programmer of the librarian, and then he starts learning about L. Bob Reif because his line of research sort of leads that way. And L. Bob Reif is introduced as last of the 19th century monopolists. So I kind of thought of him as a sort of Rockefeller type character. And there's some interviews with him which are described, and one of the topics that comes up is L. Bob Reif. He's got this big media empire, and his network is the one on which the metaverse runs. So he sort of owns all the infrastructure, and he started off with the cable TV broadcast channels, and then expanded out into telecommunications and internet, and now he's sort of got this global network which the metaverse sits on top of. And then there's what's described as a PR program interview made with Reif, and it's kind of described as something he had to do to fix his reputation, which became sullied after it turned out he was spying on all of his employees and watching them at home, and then chastising them for things that they did in the privacy of their bedroom when they came to work. And so it says here that he felt the need to blow a few million on some PR. And he's being interviewed by a journalist, and he says, "I deal in information. All television going out to consumers throughout the world goes through me." So maybe he's more of a Murdoch than a Rockefeller, but most of the information transmitted to and from the CIC database passes through my networks. The metaverse, the entire street, exists by virtue of a network that I own and control. So he's pretty powerful and very, very wealthy. And then he talks about later on how one of the problems that he's having is that the people who work for him have access to information, have that information that he deals in. And he says, follow my reasoning for a bit. When I have a programmer working under me who is working with information, he is wielding enormous power. Information is going into his brain, and it's staying there. It travels with him when he goes home at night. It gets all tangled up into his dreams, for Christ's sake. He talks to his wife about it, and God damn it, he doesn't have any right to that information. If I was running a car factory, I wouldn't let workers drive the cars home or borrow tools. But that's what I do at 5 o'clock each day all over the world when my hackers go home from work. When they used to hang rustlers in the old days, the last thing they would do is piss their pants. That was the ultimate sign, you see, that they had lost control over their own bodies, that they were about to die. It's the first function of any organization to control its own sphincters, and we're not even doing that. So we're working on refining our management techniques so that we can control that information no matter where it is, on our hard disks or even inside the programmers' heads. So this is the kind of guy he is. He's interested in mind control, and the plot
Hmm.
that is revealed later on in the
Hmm.
plot as we sort of as Hiro does his research and goes on his journey. And then it's revealed as well that part of what he's doing is he has this interest in refugees, and he has this
Refuse.
refuge. Pardon,
They're
refuse.
refuse.
Yeah,
That's it, because everything's got to have a hip short name. They're not refugees. They're capital REFUS. Refuse.
yeah, that's right. That's right. So he has a ship called the Enterprise, and it's an old military aircraft carrier, I
Hmm.
think. And then it becomes he starts to use this, and he starts filling it up with refuse, and he starts bringing them to America. And there's a whole interesting explanation about that. I labeled this section up just with replacement migration, the thing that's not happening that we can't talk about.
Exactly.
And and he says very interesting term. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, so he talks about, you've probably heard the expression that the industry feeds off of biomass like a whale straining krill from the ocean. That's my expression. I made it up. An expression like that is just like a virus, you know. It's a piece of information that spreads from one person to the next. Well, the function of the raft, and the raft is Elbob Rife's aircraft carrier, but all these other ships and vessels that have attached themselves to it to form this huge, sprawling kind of flotilla that travels throughout the world, picking people up and having people attach themselves to it. And that's where the book's climax takes place, actually, is on this thing called the raft. He says, the function of the raft is to bring more biomass to America. He says to renew America. Most countries are static, but America's like this big old clanking, smoking machine that just lumbers across the landscape, scooping up and eating everything in sight. Leaves behind a trail of garbage a mile wide, always needs more fuel. So more biomass for the American economic engine. So I
Hmm.
thought it was curious as well, back in 1992, that concept was put in there. I don't know what the sort of I suppose we were already seeing migration. It was ramping up, but it hadn't quite reached the levels that we're seeing today, I don't think.
No, no. But it is also kind of foreshadowing the whole free trade, and free trade importantly is the free movement of workers from other countries in and out of. So there's just
Yeah.
one thing I'll add about the Enterprise too. An interesting name because, right, that's Star Trek, but as Alan pointed out, it's a very Masonic word. When they do their, you know, handshakes and the clapping the shoulder and everything, it's bless us is the prayer on this enterprise, you know, whatever
Okay.
their mission is, bless.
You're right. Whatever their plan or their
Yes,
goal,
yeah, bless
whatever they're
us
trying
on
to
this
achieve.
enterprise.
Okay. So no accident then.
I don't think so.
Anything you wanted to add on L. Bob Rife as well? I'm looking for other.
Well, I think that what we haven't set up yet, because we've been now to the Library of Congress and met Lagos, and we understand that that Hiro is trying to put together the research of Lagos, who has passed away. We'll say that. Spoiler alert. And so what we haven't said is why he's on this hunt for the information and why he inherited it, which is the
Yes.
virus snow crash. And how this happens, Hiro is in the metaverse, and he gets a visit from a bad black and white avatar, and he recognizes it as Y.T. And she's there to warn him, don't take any drugs from anybody and stay away from Raven. And David, I didn't mark it in the book, but when we're introduced to David, that has an 8 in his name, but we assume that you pronounce it David.
Oh,
He
it's a five, like a
it's
V.
it's a 5. Yeah, okay, you're right. Yeah. So but it's is David, he is Jewish. This is his company, and he was the husband of Juanita. And I only mention the Jewishness because of a comment that Neal Stephenson made about him, which I didn't mark off, but it was to the effect of because of his education, because his education was better than other people's education, he just, he could do this. And I thought, wow, that is a very interesting thing because coming from any other writer, that would be an anti-Semitic remark, the way that he made that. But when he's doing it, it's clearly complimentary. It is a statement of fact, and that's David, and he's now the ex-husband, and he controls this metaverse in terms of the environment because he built it and his hackers built it. That's why Hiro knows his way around it so well. And Juanita has been trying to warn David to stay away from a product called Snow Crash and to be
Mhm.
very careful. And she's told him this. And he believes, because he's the hacker's hacker, he's created this world, that she's just rambling nonsense and there's nothing to be afraid of because there's nobody that could come in with a hack or a virus that he's not only built this great thing, but there's every antivirus, the medicine kit
Mhm.
that you could possibly need. So when they are sitting there, someone comes in, an avatar, and delivers something that is a scroll,
Mhm.
and he looks at what is on the scroll, and that's it. He first of all his avatar just crashes. It simply disintegrates, malfunctions, has to be carted off as which is what happens when an avatar is wounded or disabled or incapacitated in the metaverse. But in the real world, David has been infected with something. Nobody knows what, but he simply has shut down he's and we find out later he's essentially been turned into a some kind of vegetative state.
Mhm.
And so this happened. So this is snow crash, and snow crash is what happens when your computer screen goes into that black and white, just snowy thing. It's a
Like
major,
static on a television.
yes. And so it's a problem, and the virus component of it in the computer, they don't, yes, at this point, they don't think it's such a big deal. It's something that's going to be fixable because they've always been able to fix it. And so David languishes in a hospital bed. And this is really why Juanita, she's been working on a little bit of a mystery, but it goes into overdrive now.
Yeah.
So,
And just reminded me as well that in the same chapter I was just reading from, um, page 198, I put oh no, sorry, this is not the same chapter. This is much later in the book. But what we find out is that L. Bob Reif, he's responsible for the network. He kind of owned it and installed it. And inside the metaverse, where you find the street, which circumnavigates the world in the metaverse, where all the buildings are built, and you can travel this by monorail. There's a place in the metaverse which is described as where L. Bob Reif keeps all the guts of the metaverse. And this location plays a part in the final showdown, and it's described as a black cube exactly 20 miles on a side. And
I noticed that too.
the symbolism of a black cube being
Hmm.
at the very heart and center of the metaverse. And then in the page before that, Hiro's talking to the librarian and they're discussing Sumerian, because it becomes apparent that the language and language is likened to a virus, and ideas and information are likened to a virus, and Snow Crash itself is a kind of both digital and biological virus that is being given to people, and they're being sort of tricked into taking it. But when they start talking about Sumerian, Hiro says to the librarian, "Okay, does anyone understand Sumerian?" He says, "Yes. At any given time, it appears there are roughly 10 people in the world who can read it." He says, "Where do they work?" He says, "One in Israel, first place. One in the British Museum, one in Iraq, one in Chicago, Pennsylvania, and 5 at Rife Bible College in Houston, Texas." So just interesting that Israel pops up there, off the back of what you were mentioning about the David's character and how he's described, and then also with there being this sort of black cube at the very center of the metaverse containing the guts of the metaverse.
Hmm.
Black cube, of course, is a very prominent symbol. I think in Judaism, isn't it sort of held on a hat above the forehead in certain
Hmm.
religious practices? I don't really know exactly why or how that is. But yeah, there's definitely some
I'll
acknowledgement there.
I just opened up to the page that you're on right now, and so Hero comments, nice distribution of the people who can read Sumerian. Nice distribution. And have any of these people figured out what the word Namshub means in Sumerian? Yes, a Namshub is a speech with magical force. The closest English equivalent would be incantation, but this has a number of incorrect connotations. Did the Sumerians believe in magic? The librarian shakes his head minutely. This is the kind of seemingly precise question that is, in fact, very profound, and that pieces of software, such as myself, are notoriously clumsy at. Allow me to quote from Kramer, Samuel Noah Kramer, and John R. Meyer, Myths of Inky, The Crafty God, New York, Oxford University Press, 1989. Now, this these are some of the syllabus material that we're covering for Waiting for the Miracle. So that just cracked me up when I got there because he's taking the information, it's factual information from a book. Here, here's the quote: Religion, magic, and medicine. Religion, magic, and medicine are so completely intertwined in Mesopotamia that separating them is frustrating and perhaps futile work. The Sumerian incantations demonstrate an intimate connection between the religious, the magical, and the aesthetic, so complete that any attempt to pull one away from the other will distort the whole. There is more material in here that might help explain this subject. And he says, in where? The next room. So the librarian gestures that they go to the next room. And uh, Hiro is putting this around in his head, a speech with magical force. Nowadays, people don't believe in these kinds of things, except in the metaverse, that is, where magic is possible. The metaverse is a fictional structure made of code, and code is just a form of speech. The form that computers understand. The metaverse in its entirety could be considered a single vast Namshub. That's a magical incantation, right? Namshub, enacting itself on L. Bob Reif's fiber optic network. So there's the black cube there, and then that's kind of it. But there's more in the next room that we can talk about later when he gets into Sumerian, unless you want me to keep going here. This is the other room. They are looking at a slab that's covered with cuneiform. And on the right of the slab is an obelisk, and that's covered with cuneiform. And then there's a bas-relief figure chiseled into the top of the obelisk. So it stands out a little bit, a sculpture that stands out. And this is what it is, if you can see that. So that is the figure that we see that's carved in there. And he goes on, they talk about all of the information that's found in there in megabytes, the data. Why is L. Bob Reif so interested in this? And then there is a piece of a clay tablet that's within a clay envelope. So it's clay inside clay, well protected. And there's a warning on the outside of the clay envelope. And he asks, has it been translated? And he said, yes, it's a warning. This envelope contains the Namshub of Inki. He says, okay, I know what a Namshub is. What is the Namshub of Inki? I don't know. And maybe we should read it here. Once upon a time, there was no snake, there was no scorpion, there was no hyena, there was no lion, there was no wild dog, no wolf, there was no fear, no terror. Man had no rival. In those days, the land Shubur Hamazi, harmony tongued Sumer, the great land of the me. And me is italicized, so that's an important standalone word. Harmony tongued Sumer, the great land of the me of princeship. Uri, the land having all that is appropriate, the land Martu, resting in security, the whole universe, the people well cared for. To Enlil, in one tongue, gave speech. Then the Lord defiant, the prince defiant, the king defiant, Inki, the Lord of abundance, whose commands are trustworthy, the Lord of wisdom, who scans the land, the leader of the gods, the Lord of Eridu, endowed with wisdom, changed the speech in their mouths, put contention into it, into the speech of man that had been one. Sumer, there was one language. They spoke one language. And Inki changed the speech in their mouths and gave them new speech, and it put contention in it. So the Namshub was a self-fulfilling prophecy. Hiro says that this is a Babel story, a Tower of Babel, isn't it? Everyone was speaking the same language, and then Inki changed their speech so that they could no longer understand each other. This must be the basis for the Tower of Babel stuff in the Bible. So when we encounter the L. Bob Reif religious nutters that have somehow had something done to their brain, what we see are people who Pentecostal style, they have glossolalia, this nonsense speaking in tongues that are short, alulali, it seemingly makes absolutely no sense. And one of the other features is that they have a wire that comes out of their skull. And at a certain point, Y.T has to go into this kind of area in a park in Griffith Park in LA and find something there. And she encounters these people, and they're kind of, moonies, that they're religious nutters that want to love bomb her, but there's something sinister, and she picks up on it. And what we discover is, I don't know if I'm getting ahead here, but what we discover is that all of these people who are now basically zombies were hackers. And once their hacking abilities have been put to work on this project. In other words, they've been sucked out. They basically just had all of their brains have gone on this project, and when they are no longer of any use, they are basically kept alive, and most of them will now be having that wire in there, and the wire is how L. Bob Reif communicates zombie like with them. You do this and then they go and do that. But there's nothing else going on with them, just this glossolalia nonsense speech that they have. And they're all so happy at the church. And they want you to be happy in the church with them.
And this reminds me of something I was thinking about recently, about language and about how the culture is created, and particularly humor and jokes and comedians. There's a British comedian here, and he became really famous. I was much younger. He's still pretty big, but he kind of exploded. He's called Peter Kay, and one of the uh, bits that he did was he was talking about dinner ladies, who would be the women who kind of work the shift at school, the lunchtime shift, and they would patrol the playground, and they would herd the students in to eat their lunch at the right time. And he was making a joke about how the dinner ladies, as soon as they felt a drop of rain, would yell and be like, "Everyone get inside! It's spitting! Get inside!" Like it was this big emergency, and how they would shout, "It's spitting!" And I was thinking about this word spitting, and it's a disgusting thing to do. We all recoil at the prospect of being spat upon. We know it's kind of it's a sort of a human universal, I think, unless you live in the Dune universe, in which case it's a mark of tribute to share your moisture with somebody else, right? But I was thinking about using this word spit to describe very light rain, and where that started, and would it be possible that not necessarily in that example, but in other examples of jokes, to have our language tweaked and changed in order to set up some joke or comedian further down the line to come in with their sort of observation or comedy that, oh, isn't it funny that we say this thing, right? And I was just reflecting on that. I wonder if there are Tavistockian culture creation type think tanks working on this tweaking of the language, and they introduce it at one place, or they spread it a certain way, and then that becomes, the jokes and the laughter and the fodder for comedians further down the line. But what this was reminding me of is these spent used hackers who have been rendered sort of neutered. They've had their individuality removed, stripped, once they're no longer useful to L. Bob Reif, which solves his problem, the one he was talking about in the interview that I read from, where he's like, oh, they're taking all that information home with them, and that's not
Right.
good, is it? So it solves that problem. You turn them into these kind of glossolalia, nonsense speaking drones, and my kind of modern day equivalent of that would be people who only ever discuss very surface level stuff, whether it's just like the latest sports ball event, or the sitcom episode on television, or even just the news headlines, and they only ever talk on that very surface level of things,
Mm-hmm.
and never anything deeper or older or more profound or more complex or more occult or more esoteric, let's say. That's kind of that.
Mm-hmm.
And this is satire, so it's sort of turned up to 11. But to my mind, that's what it is. And yeah, the antenna, Hiro finds out later on, there's sort of an attack. These antennaed humans, he describes them as a new species, in fact. See if I can find it. Yeah, here we are. So this poster is chipped humans antenna heads. So there's a bit of a fight, because there's a lot of action in this. For people who like action, there's quite a bit of action. I likened it to sort of the Matrix. There's shootouts and fights and car chases and samurai
Swords.
sword, sword.
Yeah.
Yeah, all that. So, and that's all. And it reminded me particularly of the second Matrix film, which features more swords and motorbikes and high speed
Hmm.
highway car chases, right? Um, so after one of these battles, one of these chipped antenna heads gets his head blown off, and Hiro gets to sort of inspect what's going on inside. And he says that he grabs the antenna and he tries to pull it off, thinking he can use it as like thinking it's some sort of communication device that he can use to listen in.
Hmm.
And then he finds out that actually it's now that he says, let's see, the thing sticking up out of his head, a whip antenna about a foot long. It's encased in black rubber. Hiro grabs the antenna and pulls. It doesn't come off. When Hiro pulls, what's left of the guy's head twists around, but the antenna doesn't come loose. And that's how Hiro figures out that this isn't a headset at all. The antenna has been permanently grafted onto the base of the man's skull. So it's this kind of augmented
Hmm.
human who've taken the chip and it's removed their individuality and made them only capable of babbling what the hive is what is being broadcast throughout the hive at that
Hmm.
moment. Kind of
Hmm.
like the way bees will dance and shake and quiver, won't they? In sort of waves, you can see it wave going through the hive, going through the swarm. Similar kind of thing. Like that. I think I hadn't made that connection before with Bob Reif's interview, and then these antenna heads.
Yeah, interesting. I just have to go back to your comedian observation there and wondering if that had been, done Tavistock way. And Steve Martin, in one of his very earliest comedy albums, did something like that, where he has the parents who just decide how fun it would be to mess with their baby and teach it a completely different language than what everybody else is speaking. And so the child grows up. I mean, it's horrifying, really, except that this is what we're talking about here, and that and speaks nonsense that no one can understand, which confuses
Mhm.
the grown child because this is what his parents taught him, right?
Right. Okay. And I have to circle back at this point because I just found my post-it note,
Oh,
which refers to. And while we're on the topic, this is very good timing. I did mention that there is an on-the-nose joke in this book, which is even more. Uh, I don't know, not cringe because Hero Protagonist isn't cringy exactly, but it's a bit of an eye roll, isn't it? And
mhm.
this one, the other one that reaches that level of kind of eye roll is on. Let's see, where are we? This is page 324. It's the first page of chapter 48. Hero and a couple of other guys are on a boat and they're approaching the raft and they're going there to have a showdown and rescue YT and get to the bottom of the mystery and what's going on with L. Bob Reif and all these sort of immigrants that they're bringing in. And he's describing the two guys with him on the boat, the weapons that they're carrying. One of them's a sniper. And there's another one called Elliot Chung. And he says here, Elliot used to be the skipper of a boat called the Kowloon. At the moment, he's between jobs. Elliot grew up in Watts, and when he speaks English, he sounds like a black guy. Genetically speaking, he's entirely Chinese. He's fluent in both black and white English, as well as Cantonese, Taxilinga, and some Vietnamese, Spanish, and Mandarin. Elliot is armed with a 44 Magnum revolver, which he carried on board the Kowloon just for the halibut,
Yeah.
i.e., he used it to execute halibut before passengers hold them on board. Halibut grow very large and can thrash so violently that they can easily kill the people who hook them. Hence, it is prudent to fire a number of shells through their heads before taking them on board. I actually put a post-it note in there that just said, for the halibut, because I thought that was,
That's funny. That got a groan out of me too.
yeah, I know.
Yeah, that's
I was
very
like,
good.
really?
So you're right around in the area where I had some markings down, and this is too much to do, read huge chunks of it. But again, we're talking about the language and how the language is programming us. And they're discussing the mythology of Enki and Asherah, and there's some incest here in the story, in the mythology, and so it's what has to happen to protect the children from Enki. And so we talk about the eye of life. Until thou art dead, this is the curse that goes on Enki. Until thou art dead, I shall not look upon thee with the eye of life. Then she disappears, and Enki becomes very ill. 8 of his organs become sick, one for each of the plants. Finally, Nimharsag is persuaded to come back. She gives birth to 8 deities, one for each part of Enki's body that is sick, and then Enki is healed. So this pantheon of deities breaks the cycle of incest and creates a new race of male and female gods that can reproduce normally.
Hmm. Which page is that, please?
Oh, it's on my 302. I'm not sure if
Okay,
we've
yeah.
got the same page count, but in the chapter 33, which is kind of interesting that we
Aha.
get our creation myth here. So supposing that originally there was nothing but one creator, how could ordinary binary sexual relations come into being? So all through here, we really are getting into the hermaphroditic agenda. And one thing that I wanted to say here that I found so incredibly fascinating here is that what we seem to be having in Neal Stephenson's excursion into the creation myths and language in Sumeria or Sumer is it what created what? Who created what? And later on, you see the picture here in just past this, where he points out the significance of the cuneiform carving that I showed you earlier. And what he's showing us is ones and zeros in the cane there. So the idea is that everything was created from ones and zeros. So he says, okay, so there's that word again, binary. You may remember an unexplored fork earlier in our conversation that would have brought us to this same place by another route. This myth, the creation myth, this myth can be compared to the Sumerian creation myth, in which heaven and earth are united to begin with, but the world is not really created until the two are separated. Most creation myths begin with a paradoxical unity of everything, evaluated either as chaos or as paradise. And the world as we know it does not really come into being until this is changed. I should point out here that Enki's original name was En-Kur, or Lord of Kur. Kur was a primeval ocean, chaos, that Enki conquered. So then we find out this is where the me comes from, or maybe the first reference to it. So Hiro says, "Can you tell me about Enki?" And the librarian said he was the N of the city Irudu. What's an N? E-N. What's an N? Is that like a king? A priest king of sorts. The N was the custodian of the local temple, where the me and the me are the rules of society. So, in a way, what Stephenson is proposing here is that the me or the meme, the me is what controls the program. That's what controls society. So the N is the custodian, the priest king. And I thought, wow, because Alan's always talking about the ancient priesthood here. So
Mhm.
the N was the custodian of the local temple, where the me, or the rules of the society, were stored on clay tablets. And what seems to motivate Enki is that with everyone unified, without the chaos, there's no creation. So he has to destroy the unity of the one language that people all, and that poem that I read earlier, it's harmony, the harmony of Sumer, where everyone can understand each other. He has to destroy that because out of chaos comes creativity. And my note to myself is I think we're at a fundamental, somebody had just said to me, a biochemist that I was talking with last week said, in the beginning was the word, and the word was DNA. And I'm like, wow, trip on that, to me, it
Technically,
feels,
that's an acronym, isn't it?
yeah, yes, exactly. It seemed to me that what Neal Stephenson is playing with here is a kind of a debate. What is the word? Is the word the code of ones and zeros, or is it, and we see that because Snow Crash is a virus that affects both the biological, the biomass, and it also affects the um, metaverse. So
Mhm.
interesting to me. I
Yeah, wow.
think, yeah, there's I already discussed the Chomsky deep structure, surface structure. I
Oh, could we go
think.
back a second
Oh,
to the
sure.
what you were just talking about there about the hermaphroditic agenda? I know that is it Alan's first book of the trilogy
Uh-huh.
is has a title about this.
Yes, the first book has the title right here, The
There it is.
Androgynous and Parenthetically Hermaphroditic Agenda.
Fantastic.
So,
So, I added a post-it here while I was sort of reviewing this in preparation for our talk. A little bit earlier in the book, there's another research session. And actually, the more I think about it, I think these research sessions with the librarian are really the meat and potatoes and the main packet for delivery of this book. And it's just
yep,
wrapped in this
yep.
thrilling, exciting kind of perverted action story, right?
What kind of a novel could you have if he just goes to the library and the librarian says, "Well, this is how the world was created and this is what's at stake." You know, but
Yeah,
I mean, I had the same thing when I got to this exposition going on here. I'm like, "Well, hello. This is what it's about."
it's quite ham-fisted, isn't it? In a sense, because the pace totally changes, and then suddenly they're just standing around having these
Yeah.
intellectual conversations, like, "Oh, isn't that?" And then you think, "Yes," and actually, it's this book, and it and it just
You know,
or
they're,
just
they're
after,
sorry, there's a lot of commentary on why this was never turned into a movie. And it's like, well, I mean, what do you do with 100 pages of the librarian telling the whole story? I mean, how do
yeah.
you make that interesting?
So the bit that I wanted to ask you about is there's a part where the librarian is talking about how in biblical history you had the Deuteronomists, and what the Deuteronomists did was they got rid of Asherah, who was prior to the Deuteronomists coming along. Asherah was Yahweh's consort. So God had a wife, which is the title of a book I haven't read, but it's called When God Had a Wife. Picknett and Prince. Lynn Picknett and Clive Prince.
Ah,
I just like the title, and I thought it was interesting because I have friends who are Orthodox Christians, and
hmm.
the theology of Orthodox Christianity is there's one God, and the God is Father and Son to Himself, and the third part of the Trinity is the Holy Spirit, which I always which I always make. This is like kind of a crude joke, but I always make the joke is the Holy Spirit. So you've got the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, and I always think it's kind of odd how it's just purely masculine and there's nothing feminine in there at all. To me, that seems, I don't know. It just seems like odd. I'm like, where's the feminine? Where's the divine feminine or the sacred feminine in this theology? It just strikes me as something that's either missing or not there. Maybe there's a good reason for it. I'm sure the people who study Orthodox theology can explain that and have a reason for it. But it's just a topic of interest that I
I would
haven't
I
explored
would
yet. But
tell you about that. I would be happy to explain it in great detail, but women are supposed to be silent in church.
okay, let's move on then. So, but this reminded me of that because he's talking about how Yahweh Asherah was venerated as the consort of Yahweh, but then the Deuteronomic school came along, and they were nationalists, monarchists, and centralists, and they wanted to get rid of Asherah, and they did so by codifying religion, making it into a virus. He doesn't say virus; he says organized, self-propagating entity.
Hmm.
Hiro
Hmm.
says, I don't want to say virus, but according to what you just quoted me, the Torah sounds like a virus. It uses the human brain as a host. The human, makes copies of it, and more humans come to synagogue and read it. So the Deuteronomists reform Judaism. They ditch Asherah and they make it solely about Yahweh. And that reminds me of a quote earlier in the book as well, where he's asking the question about Snow Crash in particular, where he says, this Snow Crash thing, is it a virus, a drug, or a religion? And Juanita shrugs and says, what's the difference?
Hmm.
So, two things there really is just this sort of virus, drug, religion thing, all being mimetic, being transferred, passed on, affecting behavior. And then also the hermaphroditic agenda, the masculine, the feminine, the blending of those, the description of God as being one and not one sided, masculine only.
Hmm.
Um, Very interesting stuff. I don't have any answers. I don't really know what point I'm making. I'm just sort of
It
making
is
connections.
interesting. I say too because the point of reading is to learn and think for yourself and question. And there is a point which unfortunately I did not mark, but there is a point where in this discussion of the Deuteronomists, somewhere around there, Neal Stephenson is talking about Jesus and Christianity and the message of Jesus. And I have to say that the way that he explained it really resonated with me as having seeds of truth and wisdom within it, which is, he explained, well, yes, and Jesus came to, as a stand against the Pharisaical mindset, these, the rules and the virus like, cult like nature of the experience. And I would
Mhm.
have to say, that sounds right to me. That,
Yeah,
in
I,
other
I don't
words,
know where,
the
but
way that I don't have it marked, but what Neal Stephenson was saying is that what you have in Christianity not as a religion that was formed around Jesus, but what springs actually from his message and his example is definitely not a virus where you're just getting downloaded with nonsense glossolalia. It's an experiential thing that transforms an individual. However, there's so much other nonsense around. There's so much claptrap around that idea that it's hard to latch onto.
yeah, I just read that bit earlier as well when I was sort of scanning through, but I also can't find it. And
Hmm.
but yeah, I got the same sense. And he mentions that 50 years after Jesus's time, it was all changed and sort of
Hmm.
overwritten and things were added and actually Jesus was here to sort of restore because he mentions Simon Magus as well. And he says that
Yes.
both Simon Magus and Jesus venerated and not worshipped, but held in high esteem the women in their lives that they traveled with and they taught with and that they had as part of their sort of entourage, didn't they? But I don't know whereabouts that page was now. I've lost it too.
Well, there's one thing because unfortunately I have to be on the nose about getting off here and getting on the other phone call. But this little quote that I want to read is from Waiting for the Miracle, and that's the transcript form of the 24 interviews that Alan had with Jackie Petru on Sweet Liberty. And he's talking with her about how important it was for the elite to go to Egypt and study the how the ancient sign for the perfect society is Omega, which is the beehive, and the quest that Napoleon had to find the Rosetta Stone, history, scientific discovery from previous ages. Allen said, man has been at different pinnacles of scientific discovery in previous ages. There's no doubt about that. As I say, the first people to arrive on the scene, it's like a camera switching on. You see people working at blacksmithing and astrology and astronomy, and all this stuff was in Sumeria in 4,500 BC. They had that knowledge there and then. So again, it's like a camera switching on. In other words, there's no evolution that we're seeing. It's
Mhm.
there, it's a system worked out. Well, they had that knowledge there and then. Well, where did they get it from? It didn't come from outer space. It came from previous civilizations. Everybody in the Middle East, even China, even the Mayan Indians, have a story about floods and catastrophes. So there have been previous ages. If you go into the Hindu writings, you find out that they do indeed have records of many previous ages, and that has been kept from us. Now, there have been previous ages where man reaches a zenith of production and then was wiped out for one reason or another. That would destroy the whole theory of evolution. I believe that's why this theory was pushed to keep us from catching on. That there have been previous ages, that there have been survivors who had the power and the technology and, how and who used it. I think I made a typo there in transcribing it. I think it's supposed to be the know how and know how to use it on the other survivors of the planet. And then he said to Jackie, and if you hear this in the audio form, how does that grab you? It's very funny when he says that because, at the time that he said that in 1998, it would be pretty much of a grabber that we do that in that sense it's true we have such simplistic either or explanations of things and people come along like a Neal Stephenson who obviously have someone or some body of ones who are kind of guiding them along and what the exploration and conversation should be. And for the rest of us, we're kept in the dark and fed mushrooms. We're no,
Well,
we're
this book,
mushrooms. We're kept in the dark and fed you know what.
I'd rather be, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but a bump.
Um, the what it reminds me of is there's a book I read a while ago during lockdowns. In fact, year one or year two of the Big C, called the Illuminatus Trilogy by some Robert Anton Wilson or something. He's got a triple barrel name. Does that ring a bell to you at all?
The name does, but the
West?
name of the book doesn't really. But
Is it
look,
Robert Anton West? The Illuminatus Trilogy. Robert Anton Wilson. That's the guy.
okay.
Yeah, he did a series of books, the Illuminatus Trilogy, 1975, and it's kind of like this. Like it's all about secret societies, and it's got all this semi. It's got historical information in it, but it's wrapped up in this outrageous, escapade with all these crazy characters and wild happenings and events. But this book kind of reminds me of that. That it's got stuff in there. It's got threads to pull on. Obviously, I mean, the fact that it has book references in their entirety, Oxford Library with the year, it's kind of like, here's a book, go and read it, go and have a look at it. It's very unusual. I know it's a librarian who's doing it, but it's certainly giving people breadcrumbs and threads, and it's wrapped in the sort of the action and the cyberpunk tropes, which it teases and makes fun of at the same time. But it is trying to get people thinking about these bigger questions, and I have a feeling like quite a few people have said, some of the reviews that I looked at said that the ending is a bit underwhelming. It sort of just fizzles, and then it's the end.
I had the same, yeah.
You had the same experience.
I did. By the last however many pages, it had already reached its climax, and I'm like, okay, all right, all right, all right, all right, all right. Whereas, usually I'm reading something and I can't wait to, just keep reading it. And then you're like, oh, well, that's how something should end, ideally.
Right. Yeah. So it's like, it's almost like the book itself is there to deliver this payload of questions and information. That's how I kind of feel. So there's another, I mean, I don't, how much time have you got? I don't want to.
I've got 4 minutes, but you know what? I can probably see if I can delay this a little bit, because if you've got the killer thing that needs to be shared.
I've got something that I really want to share, and I can probably do it in a couple of minutes.
All right, so hold on just a second. I can actually delay this call by 5 minutes, I think.
Okay.
And that way there's no stress on it.
Okay. So going through this book and thinking about it, I think I said to you in our chats before that I didn't necessarily enjoy reading it, although there was a lot of stuff in there that got me thinking, and it's packed. And I think we could probably do another 3 hours dissecting and unpacking and talking about this stuff.
We could.
But one of the things that I did want to mention right at the end here is that I think Snow Crash is, it's kind of possible to my mind that Snow Crash is being used and is a real thing. And what I mean by this is, when you look at the title, okay, the title is Snow Crash, and Snow Crash is based on the static effect that you might see on a television that's not tuned to any particular station, or older computers, when they crashed, they would generate this static effect, which would look like snow crash. I mean, it kind of is obvious what it's referring to, snow crash. And I'm reading the book, and I'm thinking about all the ways that it's predicted the era that we live in now, and there's things we haven't even had time to mention in this call, but it predicts so many of the things that we're seeing now unfolding, and we talked about some of those already. But one of the things that is really key to bear in mind is how Snow Crash is delivered to people in the metaverse. It's delivered by them looking at something, and it's a scroll, and it's unfolded. They open it, they look at it, their eyes take in the information, and then boom, something happens. The payload is delivered. They are infected with the virus. And I'm thinking about Snow Crash, and I'm thinking about things that we look at. And when you look at things, you scan them. And what have we seen over the last few years that we never saw prior to the Big C? QR codes. And what do they look like? They look like Snow Crash. They literally look like static. Okay. And I'm thinking, these QR codes are everywhere now. Scan the QR code to look at the menu in the coffee shop. Scan the QR code to download the app so that you can get a discount on the thing that you're buying at the supermarket. They are so ubiquitous in such a short time. It is not accidental. And I know people who refuse to use them. I've sent them a thing saying, oh, connect with me. Here's the thing. And he's like, no, I'm not doing that. Send me a link instead of the QR code. And the link, the idea that a QR code looks like a snow crash is so interesting to me. And then I watched a recent episode of a TV series called Black Mirror. And I said I wasn't going to watch this series, but this is series 7. And there's an episode in there called Plaything. And I'll send you a picture from that episode that you can include in the edit of the video. But what happens is, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't watched it, uh, there's a computer game created, and the beings inside this computer game are sentient. The developer says these beings are sentient. This is the first computer game of its kind because the creatures you can see on the screen, they're actual living digital life forms, and it's not a game in a traditional sense. It's more like an evolutionary thing. You can interact with them, and they'll sort of evolve and learn, and do self learning and be and kind of progress forward. And the character in the episode, he is a writer for a PC magazine, kind of like Wired, and he gets a hold of a copy of this computer game with these creatures on it, which are called what are they called now? Something like thronglets, right? It's called the Throng. And he becomes obsessed with these. He takes this thing home and he puts it onto his computer, and he starts becoming obsessed with these little digital creatures. And he ends up being able to understand their language, and he can communicate with them. And they have this like chirpy kind of singing language that they communicate with him in. And he starts to understand it, and then he starts to get obsessed, and he begins upgrading his computer to give them more processing power to help them evolve and grow and develop. And this whole story is told in retrospect from the point of view of a guy who's been arrested, and he's telling the story to the police who've arrested him. And this is his background. When I was a young man, all this thing happened, and it led to the present day. And then as it turns out that these thronglets that he's been working with and helping evolve and interacting with have evolved to a level where they convince him to sort of download them into his mind. So he makes this little socket and he downloads them in. So he merges with them, kind of like merging with a sort of hive mind. And while he's in the police station, he's asking for a pen and paper, and they keep telling him, no, you can't have one. It's when you're not allowed to have this stuff. And eventually he talks them into giving him a piece of a pen and paper, and he's drawing this thing on the paper, and they're saying, what are you drawing? He says, don't worry, you're gonna realize in a minute. And he's telling this story, and then the climax of the show is he holds this thing round, and it's a QR code, and it's kind of a circular QR code. And they look at it and they're like, what is it? We don't understand it. He says, no, you don't understand it, but your computer does. And he points to the camera in the corner of the room that's filming them, because it's an interrogation room. And they're like, what are you talking about? And he says, the information contained in this QR code has been created by the Throng, and now it's downloaded into your computer mainframe and onto the internet. And your computer, because it's the government computer, because it's the police, they have the most powerful computer in the country. And he says, in a few minutes, every device that's connected to your super government computer is going to play a sound, and everyone who hears that sound is going to be instantly merged with the Throng. And now there's nothing you can do to stop it. And then the final part of this episode is they're all panicking, and then eventually the sound comes out through all the speakers, and the policeman kind of grabs his head, falls backwards on the floor. And then the final scene is the character who's told this whole story standing over him, reaching out with his hand and sort of grinning like, you're one of us now. And that's the whole story, right? So that just brings together this idea of the visual of the snow crash, the effect, the listening as well, the importance of what you take into your body by way of your eyes and your ears. It kind of connects what's going on in reality to a deeper, more sinister plan, I think. And I just wanted to mention that and tell people about it, because Snow Crash being what it is, being how popular it is, how well known, how venerated and lauded and award-winning and worshipped by the likes of Bill Gates and the connections with Bezos and so on. It's no accident, and I think there's a lot of that we can glean from this book in terms of the plan, where it's going,
Hmm.
what's going to happen next. But you know, hopefully we'll be saved by 15-year-old skateboarders and pizza delivery guys with samurai swords, so it'll be all right in the end.
that's great. That's very funny. I also read that Peter Thiel names it as one of his favorites. So there, but and so we can relax because Palantir is going to surveil all, sees
Phew.
all, takes care of everything. I hate to go. I could spend another 3 hours talking about this with you, but we've got to you're got the baby on the way, and you are actually leading the conversation if all things go our way for the group for Waiting for the Miracle on the 14th of June.
Mhm.
And that is interviews 5 and 6 from Waiting for the Miracle. And then you and I need to pick the next novel that we cover, or it could actually be, not a novel, but I think it's an interesting break from both what I do and what you do in Hayes Reviews that we do talk about novels, and there's an awful lot of predictive programming in them that we can dissect. So we'll have to do that. And I hate to run, but I have to. And I wish you all a good week. Next week is Neil Foster, and I haven't spoken with Neil in several months, so I'm looking forward to that. So thank you for being here, and thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Melissa. I've had a great time on this conversation, and I'm looking forward to the next one, whatever it ends up being.
All right. Well, I know you've got a lot on your mind right now and lots of activity going on, but we'll pick it and do it. All right. Thanks.